Hey everyone, my name is Mallory Wade. My presentation is going to be on W.E.B. Du Bois, whose name was William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. He was born in 1868 and died in 1963, which his birth dates and the dates that he lived have a lot of significance into the role he played into society. We can kind of categorize him as a sociologist, a historian, a civil rights advocate, or activist, my apologies, a writer, an editor, and a Pan-Africanist. He was a big part of the Pan-African movement. Um, Also, most of what Du Bois did is centered around civil rights and racial equality for African Americans in America. Um, so, a little bit about his educational ideas. We can describe Du Bois as a pragmatist because he saw things through a very realistic point of view. So, he understood where he stood in society during this time. Like I said, he was born in the late 1860s and he died in the 1960s, which has a lot of implications, meaning that he was born after the Emancipation Proclamation and after the Civil War. He was in that time period where he grew up only knowing segregation in society and seeing a lot of racism towards his people. So, like I said, many of his ideas and his philosophies are centered around racial equality in the civil rights movement because during this time, a lot of African Americans didn't have many rights. Du Bois was a proprietor of creating the same educational opportunities for white children, for African American children that white Americans were receiving during this time. So, if African American children were going to school during this time, they were not afforded nearly the same opportunities as white children were. Moreover, they were receiving little to no textbooks. The textbooks they received were dated or in horrible conditions. They weren't receiving funds to further the educational opportunities for these African American children. And also, like I said, during this time, like if students wanted to go to, African American students wanted to go to a better school, they usually had to pay for it, and many of the parents couldn't afford that. So that's another reason why Du Bois advocated for a free public education for all students. So it was, again, going back to that equal equality, the equal opportunity for these African American children, as well as a lot of his philosophies had to deal with integrating moral character and development into the curriculum, which is another one of those things that we see today. There's a big emphasis on that. Additionally, educational influences that he had, one of the biggest influence that he had was his book, The Souls of Black Folk, which dealt with the issue of white oppression by the white man in society. So that book is studied through the eyes of African Americans, Native Americans, the Japanese during the internment camp, the Hmong people during the Vietnam War. We can look to that book for emotions that are created by those oppressed people. So that book has long-lasting significance even through today. In that book, Du Bois talks about how the African Americans should be able to integrate in society and how we should be equal. Again, going back to that racial equality that he so much longed for. Another thing Du Bois helped do was create the NAACP, which still has a big effect in the educational realm today, to make sure, again, that African American children and people of color are being treated the same and being afforded the same opportunities that white children are being afforded. Lastly, another influence that he had was he helped shape the thinking of many African American peoples during the 1900s, to jumpstart part of the civil rights movement and get them excited, if you will, to be a part of that movement and better themselves so that they can long-term better their people and better the livelihood of those people. One criticism that many people have had of Du Bois was the idea that he believed in many Marxist ideals, which that is true. He didn't come out and say it until later, because during, McCarthy era, all of that, he couldn't come out and say, yes, I advocate for many communist beliefs. But he in fact did, which is why he left and went to Ghana, where he eventually died. But, that was one of his biggest critiques. And then additionally, like, there were many critiques by white people because of what he was advocating for, just because of the nature of the civil rights movement. We see, if we look back to history, we see that many African Americans were shot at, like Martin Luther King Jr., for advocating in what they believe in. So again, that's another critique that many people had, but that was more so the critique of the white man who was oppressing African Americans during this time. So that's about all I have to say. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoy it. Bye.